So now we've covered the basics of the production possibility frontier, shifts and pivots with an example of baking desserts. Let's take another example here and let's look and assume that all the farmers in Georgia can make either peaches and corn. Some of the land is really good for growing peaches and some of the land is really good for growing corn. So what is the opportunity cost of growing from 1,900 peaches up to 2,000 peaches? Well, it's 350 corn, right? If we want to grow that extra 100 peaches, we're going to have to give up this 350 corn. Now, again, what is the opportunity cost of 100 peaches when we're going from 1,700 peaches down to 1,400? So we're going to go from 1,700 down to 1,400 peaches. We want to know what the opportunity cost is of 100 peaches making that jump. To do this calculation, we're going to need to take the total cost. We're going to have to multiply that by our scalar. So we want 100 and not 300. So there's our scalar, and that'll give us our opportunity cost. So if we take our total cost, that's 750 minus 600. Where do we get that? From the corn over here, right? We're going from 1,700 to 1,400, and that requires going from 600 to 750. So here is how much corn we're going to be giving up, 150. And then we want 100 peaches. What's the opportunity cost of 100 peaches? We're going to have to divide that by how many peaches we're actually giving up. So here we're actually giving up 300 peaches. We want to know what's the cost of the first 100. So if we do that calculation, we'll see that this is just 50 corn, right? So we have 150 is the difference here. And this is 100 over 300, or 1/3. So 150 divided by 3 is 50. So if you notice up here, we said the opportunity cost of going from 1,900 to 2,000 was 350 corn. But the opportunity cost of going from 1,700 to 1,400 was only 50 corn. What is going on? Why do we see a difference here? Well, we can explain it pretty simply that some of the land is really good for growing peaches and some of the land is really good for growing corn. So some farmers may be experts at growing peaches and some could be experts at growing corn. But the point here is at some point you're putting people who are people or land, which is better at growing corn, in charge of growing peaches instead of corn. So they're not going to be able to produce as much as they would have for corn. And it's the same vice versa. If you take all the people who usually grow peaches and make them grow corn, you're not going to get as much corn out of them as you would the first people who started growing corn. Because of all this, you're going to get a different looking PPF. It's actually going to be curved. Okay? And this is what we assume production possibility frontiers look like in real life. Okay? The people up here, we're taking people who are good at growing peaches and forcing them to grow corn. And down here, we're taking people or land that is good at growing corn and forcing them to grow peaches. Right? So that is how we get a curved production possibility frontier. So let's take an example here. We've got a bad drought in Georgia that causes the number of peaches to be reduced from last year. So this decreases the number of peaches that can be produced by farmers this year. We had less peaches last year, so we can't produce as many peaches this year. So how is this going to affect our production possibility frontier? We see an increase or decrease. We're going to see a shift downward, a pivot away from corn, or a pivot away from peaches. Let's go through each of these and what each of them would look like, and then I'll give you the option to think about it a little bit and decide what you think is going to happen. So if we see a decrease in peach production, is that going to cause a shift downward? Are we going to go from our orange PPF down here to this green PPF where we see a decrease in peach and corn production both? Are we going to see a pivot for a decrease in corn? So we've decreased our peach production. Is that going to show up on our PPF by a decrease in corn production, but no effect on our peach production? Or are we going to see a pivot decrease in peach, where we see going from this orange to the blue, we have less peach production, but the same amount of corn production at each level. Okay? So a decrease in peach production causes which one? A shift downward in production, a pivot away from corn, or a pivot away from peaches. Give you a couple seconds to think about it. And we should see a pivot away from peaches, right? If we have a decrease in peach production, this is just a pivot away from peaches. Okay, let's do another example here. Falling fuel and tractor costs cause more people to become farmers. So we have more people that are going into farming. How is this going to affect our production possibility frontier? Will we see an increase or decrease? We're going to see a pivot or a shift. Well, let's take a look at all three of our options here. We could see a shift outward, an increase in peach and corn production. We could see a pivot towards corn, right? So we're going to see an increase in corn production and no change for peaches, or we could see a pivot the other way with an increase in peaches. So we have no change in corn or an increase in peaches. So if we're going to increase the number of farmers, which one do we think is most likely? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. We should see a shift outward. So we're going to increase both peaches and corn. We've increased the total number of